My name is Helen Thompson, and at 64, I never imagined my life would crumble this way. After spending almost a month in the hospital recovering from heart surgery, I returned home only to find new locks on my door. My son Jake stood there cold as ice, his wife Andrea smirking behind him. "It's no longer yours, Mom. Don't come in," he said without a hint of remorse. The house my late husband and I had built together was now stolen from me by our only child. Let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button before I tell you how I fought back and what happened when I did. I used to have what most would call a peaceful life. After losing my husband Richard to cancer 10 years ago, I settled into a comfortable routine in our two-story home in the suburbs of Boston. We had built this house together 35 years ago when Jake was just a toddler. Every corner held memories, the slight dent in the kitchen doorframe where we marked Jake's height each birthday, the bay window where Richard and I would sit with our morning coffee watching cardinals visit the bird feeder, and the creaky third step on the staircase that we never fixed because it became our burglar alarm. The neighbors on Maple Street had become like family over the decades. Martha Johnson, my next-door neighbor for 20 years, checked on me daily with fresh muffins or garden vegetables. Tom and Alice Peterson across the street always helped with yard work since Richard passed. We had weekly book club meetings rotating between our homes and holiday gatherings that kept loneliness at bay. After 40 years of teaching second grade at Lincoln Elementary, I had retired but kept busy volunteering 3 days a week at our local library. The routine gave structure to my days, shelving books on Mondays, reading to children on Wednesdays, and helping with the computer literacy program for seniors on Fridays. The library staff became a second family, especially Carol, the head librarian who had been my student decades ago. Jake had been my pride and joy. Richard and I sacrificed everything to give him opportunities we never had. We paid for private school when the public schools had budget cuts, drove him to countless baseball practices, and saved for his college education. He graduated from Boston University with a business degree and secured a job at a marketing firm downtown. I was so proud watching him build his career, even if it meant seeing him less often as adult responsibilities took over. Everything changed when Jake met Andrea 3 years ago. She came from a wealthy background, her parents owning a chain of boutique clothing stores called Park Fashion across the Northeast. The Parks lived in a mansion in Brookline and never tried to hide their disdain for our quaint neighborhood or my outdated home. Andrea always made subtle comments about the worn carpet in the living room or how the kitchen needed a complete overhaul to be functional. She would examine family photos with a critical eye, suggesting they be replaced with something more contemporary. Jake changed after meeting Andrea. His visits became less frequent, and when they did come over, he seemed embarrassed by the home he grew up in. He started talking about investment properties, house flipping, and how I was sitting on valuable real estate. The warm, thoughtful son I raised was being replaced by someone obsessed with appearances and money. He traded his reliable sedan for a luxury car he could barely afford and started dressing exclusively in designer clothes that Andrea selected. 6 months before my hospitalization, Jake and Andrea's visits took on a different tone. They began asking detailed questions about my mortgage, whether the house was fully paid off, and if I had considered downsizing to something more manageable. Andrea would bring real estate listings for condos and retirement communities, suggesting I would be so much happier without the burden of maintaining this old house. One evening, I overheard them in the kitchen while I was in the hallway bathroom. Andrea was saying, "Your mother doesn't need all this space. My parents could transform this location into something actually valuable. The corner lot is perfect for the new store." Jake responded, "I know, but she's stubborn about the house. Dad built it, and she won't let go of anything he touched." Andrea's voice turned cold. "Well, we need to figure something out soon. My parents won't hold the investment funds forever. There are other properties they could develop instead." That night, I couldn't sleep. The conversation kept replaying in my head. I had always planned to leave the house to Jake eventually, but the idea that they were plotting behind my back made me sick to my stomach. I later learned that Andrea's parents were looking to expand their business into our neighborhood. Property values had skyrocketed as young professionals discovered our once modest suburb, and the Parks wanted to open an upscale boutique. My corner lot with its large yard would allow for a sizable store with parking, a rare find in our increasingly crowded area. My health had been declining that spring. I felt constantly tired, sometimes experiencing chest pain that I dismissed as indigestion or anxiety. During my annual checkup, my doctor detected an irregular heartbeat and ordered additional tests. The results shocked us both. I needed a valve replacement surgery as soon as possible. The doctor explained the risks of delaying treatment, scheduling the procedure for the following week. When I told Jake about the diagnosis, he seemed distracted, asking more questions about recovery time than my actual condition. The day before my surgery, he visited alone, unusual since he and Andrea had become inseparable. "Mom with you, going into the hospital. I think I should take care of things here," he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Everything's fine, Jake. Martha has a spare key if anything comes up." He shook his head firmly. "You need someone handling bills and checking on the house daily. I'm your son. It should be me, not the neighbors." He paused, adding, "Actually, the lawyer said I should have power of attorney while you're incapacitated." The word incapacitated stung, but his reasoning seemed sound. The surgery carried risks and recovery would take weeks. I signed the power of attorney document he brought, limiting it to the expected recovery period. I noticed some blank spaces in the form but dismissed my concerns. This was my son, after all. As the nurse wheeled me to surgery the next morning, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Something felt wrong about Jake's sudden interest in managing my affairs, but I pushed the thought away. I needed to focus on surviving the operation, not on suspicions about my only child. My surgery was supposed to be straightforward, a valve replacement with a 5-day hospital stay. No one expected the complications that followed. The new valve failed to function properly, requiring a second emergency procedure. Then came a post-surgical infection that sent my temperature soaring and kept me in intensive care for 9 days. By the time I stabilized, nearly 3 weeks had passed in a blur of medication pain and fitful sleep. During those long hospital days, I expected Jake to be a regular presence. Instead, he visited just twice, both times for less than 30 minutes. He seemed uncomfortable checking his watch and fielding texts that kept interrupting our conversations. "The house is fine," he would say before I could ask, providing no details. "Andrea and I are taking care of everything." I tried calling home several times when I felt stronger, but no one ever answered. When I mentioned this to Jake, he claimed they were probably out running errands related to my house maintenance. "We're renovating some things to make it easier for you when you return," he said vaguely. "Nothing major, just some updates that were long overdue." This explanation set off alarm bells. I had never authorized renovations, and the power of attorney was for handling financial affairs, not remodeling my home. When I expressed this, Jake became defensive. "Mom, you've put off necessary repairs for years. The plumbing is ancient, and the electrical needs updating. We're just taking care of things while you can't." Too weak to argue, I let it drop, but the unease grew stronger. Sarah, my day nurse, became my confidant during those long hours. A woman in her late 30s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, she noticed my distress after Jake's infrequent visits. "Something doesn't feel right," I confessed to her one evening. "My son is acting strange about my house." Sarah sat on the edge of my bed, her shift ending, but her concern evident. "Helen, I don't want to overstep, but I've seen family situations turn ugly when money or property is involved. Have you protected yourself legally?" Her question forced me to confront what I'd been avoiding, the possibility that Jake and Andrea had ulterior motives. I explained about the power of attorney. Sarah frowned. "Did you read every word before signing? Were there any blank sections?" When I admitted there were, she recommended calling a lawyer. "Just to be safe," she insisted, offering her cell phone. I couldn't bring myself to make that call. Despite everything, Jake was my son. Surely he wouldn't betray his own mother. Finally, after 26 days, the doctors cleared me for discharge. I called Jake the night before, and he promised to pick me up at 10 the next morning. I packed my few belongings, eager to return home and put this medical nightmare behind me. Morning came, but Jake didn't. I waited in the discharge area until noon, calling repeatedly with no answer. Eventually, Sarah, who had just started her shift, found me still waiting. "Let me guess. Family no-show?" she asked gently. Fighting tears, I nodded. "This happens more than you'd think," she said, patting my hand. "Let me call you a cab." The taxi ride home felt surreal. After weeks confined to a hospital room, the familiar streets of my neighborhood looked simultaneously the same and different. Spring had fully arrived during my absence. Gardens bloomed, trees had leafed out, and children's bikes littered driveways. The normalcy of it all made what was about to happen even more shocking. As the cab pulled up to my house, I immediately noticed changes. The porch had been painted a color I would never choose, a stark white that replaced the warm tan Richard and I'd selected years ago. New modern light fixtures flanked the door, and my beloved flower planters were gone, replaced by geometric concrete pots containing plants I didn't recognize. Most alarmingly, 3 unfamiliar cars sat in the driveway and along the curb. One bore the logo of Park Fashion on its door, Andrea's family business. My hands shook as I paid the driver, adding a tip that my limited finances couldn't really afford. Clutching my small suitcase, I approached my own front door with the trepidation of a stranger. The brass key I'd carried for decades no longer fit the lock. A sleek new keypad had replaced the familiar deadbolt. I stood there bewildered before pressing the doorbell. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see movement inside, multiple people walking around in what had been my living room. When the door finally opened, Jake stood there, his expression shifting from surprise to something harder as he recognized me. Behind him, I glimpsed Andrea and an older couple I recognized from photos as her parents. They were sitting on new furniture that had replaced my comfortable old sofa and armchairs. The living room walls, once adorned with family photos, now displayed modern art and the Park Fashion logo mock-up. "Mom," Jake said flatly, blocking the entrance, "we weren't expecting you today. The hospital discharged me. I called you yesterday and this morning." My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. Andrea appeared beside him, her arm possessively linking with his. "You should have confirmed before just showing up." I stared at them in disbelief. "Showing up? This is my house." That's when Jake said the words that shattered my world. "It's no longer yours, Mom. Don't come in." I thought I must have misheard. "What are you talking about?" "This is my home." Jake reached into his pocket and produced a document. "You signed over ownership to me before your surgery. Remember the papers, this house legally belongs to me now." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. That was a power of attorney for while I was in the hospital, not a transfer of ownership. Andrea's smile turned smug. "The documents clearly indicate a property transfer. Your signature is right there." I reached for the paper, but Jake pulled it back. "It's all legal, Mom. You might want to find somewhere else to stay while you figure things out." From inside, Mr. Park called out, "Is there a problem, Jake? We need to go over the construction timeline." "No problem," Jake replied, still blocking the doorway. "My mother was just leaving." The casual cruelty in his voice broke something inside me. "Jake, please. I just got out of the hospital. Where am I supposed to go?" "You should have thought about that before showing up unannounced," Andrea said coldly. "We've already begun renovations for the store." "Store," I echoed, my worst fears confirmed. Mr. Park appeared behind them. "Ah, Mrs. Thompson, your son didn't mention you'd be visiting today. We're quite busy with the remodeling plans." "Remodeling? You're turning my home into a store." My voice rose, drawing the attention of my neighbor Martha, who was working in her garden next door. "Mom, you're making a scene," Jake hissed. "This is a business matter now. The decision is made." I reached for the doorframe to steady myself, a wave of dizziness threatening to overcome me. "Let me see those papers again." "That's not what I signed." Andrea stepped forward. "Mrs. Thompson, if you continue causing problems, we'll have to call the police." Martha was approaching now, concern on her face. "Helen, is everything okay?" Before I could answer, Jake spoke firmly. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Johnson. My mother is just confused after her hospital stay. We're sorting it out." "Confused?" I found my voice anger breaking through shock. "You stole my house while I was having heart surgery." Jake lowered his voice to a threatening whisper. "The papers are legal. If you make this difficult, you'll only embarrass yourself. Leave now, or we really will call the police." Andrea's father produced a business card. "Our lawyer's information. Have your representative contact him if you wish to discuss this further. Now we have a meeting with contractors in 10 minutes. The door closed in my face. I stood there still clutching my hospital bag, locked out of the home where I had lived for 35 years. The home where I had raised my son. The home that contained everything I owned in the world. Martha reached me just as my knees began to give way. "Helen, what in the world is happening?" The tears I had been holding back finally broke free. "They took my house, Martha. My own son stole my house while I was in the hospital. That first night after being turned away from my own home remains the lowest point of my life. Martha insisted I stay with her, setting up her guest room with fresh linens and a vase of daffodils from her garden. Her kindness only made the contrast with my son's betrayal more painful. Alone in the unfamiliar bedroom, I curled into a ball, my surgical incision throbbing with each sob. The medication schedule I needed to follow seemed irrelevant now. What did it matter if my heart failed again? The life I had known was already gone. Around midnight, a sharp pain radiated through my chest, different from my surgical discomfort. Panic gripped me. Was I having another heart attack? I fumbled for the emergency medication the doctor had prescribed, swallowing it with shaking hands. As I waited for it to take effect, staring at Martha's ceiling, a strange calm settled over me. If this was how it ended, at least I wouldn't have to face tomorrow. But morning came anyway. Martha brought tea and toast on a tray, her face lined with worry. "I called the police department while you were sleeping," she said, sitting at the edge of the bed. "They said it's a civil matter, not criminal. They can't help unless there's a direct threat or violence." I nodded numbly. "What about my things? My clothes? My photos? Richard's ashes?" Martha squeezed my hand. "We'll figure it out, Helen. First, you need to get stronger." Over the next few days, I made half-hearted attempts to resolve the situation. I called our family doctor, who expressed outrage but had no legal advice to offer. I reached out to a former colleague from school who had retired and become a real estate agent, but she said property transfers, once recorded, were difficult to challenge without clear evidence of fraud. My small circle of friends rallied around me. Carol from the library brought clothes in my size from her own closet. Tom and Alice Peterson offered their spare room if I needed a change of scenery. But their help, while touching, couldn't address the fundamental problem. I was homeless, nearly penniless, and betrayed by my only child. On the fifth day, Martha returned from grocery shopping with determined energy. "I've been thinking, Helen. My cousin's daughter is a lawyer. She works with a nonprofit that helps seniors with legal issues. I called her this morning. I can't afford a lawyer." I said the words bitter in my mouth. My savings were modest, and I had no access to them without my financial documents all locked inside my former home. "Diana's organization works pro bono for cases like yours," Martha explained. "She wants to meet you tomorrow. Will you go?" With nothing to lose? I agreed. Diana Ross wasn't what I expected. At 45, she projected confidence without arrogance. Her curly hair cut short and practical, her handshake firm. Her small office in a community legal aid center was cluttered but organized walls lined with degrees and community service awards. "Mrs. Thompson, your situation isn't as uncommon as you might think," she said after hearing my story. "Elder financial abuse is a growing problem often perpetrated by family members." The term elder abuse stung. At 64, I didn't consider myself elderly, but Diana's no-nonsense approach was oddly comforting. "First things first," she continued. "Did you bring the power of attorney document you remember signing?" I shook my head. "It's in the house. All my papers are there." Diana made notes. "We'll request copies through legal channels. Meanwhile, I want to examine the property transfer your son showed you. We'll need to file an emergency injunction to prevent them from making permanent changes to the property." For the first time since the hospital, I felt a flicker of hope. Someone believed me. Someone was taking action. Diana's investigation moved quickly. She hired Lincoln, a retired police detective who now worked as a private investigator, to look into Jake Andrea and the Park family. His findings were illuminating. "The Parks have been involved in 2 previous lawsuits," Lincoln reported during our meeting 3 days later. "Both involved allegations of fraudulent business practices. Both settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements." Diana nodded. "And Jake's financial situation?" Lincoln slid a paper across the desk. "He's underwater. Credit card debt exceeding $40,000. Mortgage on a condo he can barely afford. And this is interesting. A deposit of $75,000 into his account 2 days after Mrs. Thompson's surgery." "From the Parks?" Diana asked. "Through a shell company, but yes. Looks like a down payment." I felt physically ill. "My son sold my house for $75,000. It's worth at least 5 times that." Lincoln's expression softened. "The 75 was just the first payment. There's a schedule for 3 more payments totaling another $300,000 contingent on successful transfer and development. Diana turned to me. This is good news for our case, Mrs. Thompson. It's clear evidence of suspicious timing and possible fraud. While Diana worked the legal angles, my community continued to support me in ways that brought me to tears. Martha organized a fundraiser through the neighborhood association, raising enough to cover immediate expenses. The library where I volunteered held a book sale in my name. Even former students, now adults with families of their own, contributed when they heard about my situation. Sarah, my nurse from the hospital, contacted Diana, offering to testify about my mental state during my stay. I can confirm you were in no condition to make major financial decisions, she said during her visit to Martha's, and I documented your confusion from the medication in your chart. With each person who stepped forward to help, my determination grew. This wasn't just about getting my house back anymore, it was about justice. 2 weeks after being turned away from my home, Diana had assembled enough evidence to implement our counterattack. The first step required something I'd been avoiding, returning to the house to retrieve crucial documents. Your original deed should be in the house somewhere, Diana explained, and if we can find the actual power of attorney document you signed, we might be able to prove tampering. Martha volunteered to help with what we had begun calling Operation Homecoming. Jake and Andrea leave every weekday around 8, she reported after a few days of casual observation. His car is gone until evening, and lately contractors arrive around 9. We chose a Tuesday morning for our mission. Martha created a diversion by accidentally setting off her car alarm just as the contractors arrived, drawing them to the street in front of her house. Meanwhile, I slipped through the back using the hidden spare key I'd kept under a false rock in the garden, something Jake had never known about. Entering my home as an intruder felt surreal. The kitchen had already been partially demolished, countertops ripped out, and appliances disconnected. I moved quickly upstairs where the contractors hadn't yet begun work. My bedroom had been turned into a storage area, boxes piled haphazardly. Many contained my belongings, thankfully not yet discarded. I located my jewelry box, containing not just jewelry, but also the key to the secret compartment Richard had built into our closet floor. Our hurricane hole, he had called it, a place for irreplaceable documents and valuables. The contractors' voices grew louder downstairs. I worked frantically, moving boxes to access the closet. The floor panel looked undisturbed. Jake had never known about this hiding spot. Inside, I found everything intact: our original house deed, Richard's will naming me sole inheritor, insurance papers, and most importantly, the power of attorney document I had signed. Even in my rush, I could see the alterations. Where spaces had been blank when I signed text, now appeared in a slightly different font, granting Jake not just temporary authority but full transfer rights to the property. The forgery was obvious to my eye. Would it be to a court's? I photographed everything with the prepaid phone Diana had provided, then secured the original documents in a slim portfolio Martha had given me. As an afterthought, I grabbed a few precious photos from the bedside table, my wedding picture and Jake's high school graduation. Then I slipped out the way I had come, heart-pounding but mission accomplished. Diana was ecstatic about our findings. This is exactly what we needed. The alterations to the power of attorney are clear forgeries, and we have proof you're the rightful owner through the original deed and your husband's will. She immediately filed for an emergency injunction to halt all construction work on the property, followed by a formal complaint alleging fraud, elder abuse, and illegal property transfer. The media angle was Diana's idea. Public pressure can be powerful in cases like this, she explained. Your son and the Parks won't want their reputations damaged. She contacted Eliza Warner, a reporter for the local newspaper who specialized in consumer protection stories. Eliza interviewed me at Martha's house, taking photos of my surgical scar and the altered documents. 2 days later, the story ran with the headline, "Son Steals Home from Mother Recovering from Heart Surgery." The article detailed everything: Jake's deception, the park's business plans, and the community's efforts to help me. It included statements from my doctor about my vulnerable condition in the hospital and expert opinions on the prevalence of elder financial abuse. By evening, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets and was trending on social media. The morning after the article appeared, Diana served Jake and the Parks with formal legal notice demanding immediate cessation of all construction activities and return of the property within 48 hours, or we would pursue criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse. That night, Jake called Martha's house. His voice sounded desperate. "Mom, we need to talk. This has gotten out of hand." "Out of hand?" I repeated, anger replacing the hurt I'd felt for weeks. "You stole my home while I was fighting for my life in the hospital." "It wasn't like that," he insisted. "Andrea's parents saw an opportunity and things moved fast. I never meant to hurt you." "Where was I supposed to go?" "Jake, did you even think about that?" His silence was damning. "Diana will be in touch with your lawyer," I said finally. "I have nothing more to say to you directly." When I hung up, I was shaking, but for the first time it wasn't from fear or grief. It was from resolve. The Boston County Courthouse intimidated me with its grand columns and formal atmosphere, but Diana's calm presence kept me grounded. We had filed for an emergency hearing, and just 3 weeks after my return from the hospital, we faced Jake and the Parks in the courtroom of Judge Harriet Fleming. I barely recognized my son in his dark suit sitting beside a silver-haired attorney whose services surely cost more than Jake could afford. Andrea sat behind them, her parents flanking her like bodyguards. None of them looked in my direction as we entered. Diana had prepared me well for the proceedings, but nothing could ready me for the emotional impact of hearing my family drama dissected in clinical legal terms. The Parks attorney, Mr. Gladstone, presented their side, first characterizing the situation as a misunderstanding between mother and son. "Mrs. Thompson clearly signed the transfer documents," Gladstone asserted, displaying copies on the courtroom screen. "Her signature appears on all required lines. Mr. Thompson acted with his mother's full knowledge and consent." Judge Fleming, a stern woman in her 60s, studied the documents carefully before turning to Diana. "Counselor Ross, your response." Diana approached confidently. "Your Honor, we have clear evidence that these documents were altered after Mrs. Thompson signed them. What she believed she was signing was a temporary power of attorney during her hospitalization. She presented our evidence methodically. The original power of attorney with visible alterations, medical records showing I was heavily medicated during my hospital stay, and affidavits from medical staff attesting to my compromised mental state. Dr. Levinson, my cardiologist, testified about the effects of anesthesia and pain medication on cognitive function. Mrs. Thompson was in no condition to make major financial decisions during her hospitalization. Any consent given during that period would be highly questionable from a medical standpoint. The Parks attorney tried to discredit the doctor's testimony, suggesting that I had shown clear understanding when signing the documents. But his argument weakened when Diana produced hospital records showing I was on 4 different medications that carried warnings about impaired judgment. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Diana continued, "we have evidence of financial transactions suggesting this was a premeditated scheme." She displayed Lincoln's findings about the $75,000 payment to Jake's account. Mr. Gladstone objected vigorously. This payment was a legitimate business transaction unrelated to the property transfer. Judge Fleming overruled him. "The timing is certainly relevant to these proceedings." Just as Diana prepared to call her next witness, the courtroom doors opened. A young woman in a tailored suit entered, catching the attention of Jake's attorney, who immediately requested a brief recess. The judge granted 15 minutes. During the break, Diana approached the young woman, returning to me with surprising news. "That's Melanie Carter Jake's executive assistant at his firm. She came forward this morning with additional evidence." When court resumed, Melanie took the stand. Despite visible nervousness, her testimony was devastating. 2 months ago, Mr. Thompson asked me to help prepare documents related to his mother's property," she stated. "He specifically requested that I research how to modify legal documents after signature. When I questioned the legality, he said it was just a formality since his mother had agreed verbally but was too ill to sign new papers." Jake's face had turned ashen. Andrea whispered furiously to her father, who seemed to be considering exit strategies. Melanie continued, "I also overheard multiple conversations between Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Park about converting the residential property to commercial use. They discussed how to expedite the process while Mrs. Thompson was hospitalized." By the time Melanie finished, even Mr. Gladstone seemed to recognize their position had weakened considerably. He requested another recess to consult with his clients. Judge Fleming denied it. "I've heard enough to make a preliminary ruling. The evidence suggests that the property transfer was executed under highly suspicious circumstances with strong indications of document tampering and possible fraud." She looked directly at Jake, her disapproval evident. "Mr. Thompson, I am issuing an immediate injunction halting all construction and returning temporary possession of the property to Mrs. Thompson while the full case proceeds. You and any other occupants must vacate the premises within 24 hours. To the park's attorney, she added, Counselor, I suggest you advise your clients about the potential criminal implications of this case. The court will be referring evidence of document fraud to the district attorney's office for review. The victory felt surreal. As we left the courtroom, reporters gathered outside asked for statements. Diana handled most questions professionally, while I stood silent, overwhelmed by the turn of events. Across the hallway, I caught Jake's eye briefly before Andrea pulled him toward the exit, the parks following with faces like thunderclouds. Diana squeezed my arm. This is just the beginning, Helen. But it's a good beginning. The following morning, Diana and I met Lincoln and 2 police officers at my house. Despite the court order, we weren't sure if Jake and the Parks would comply peacefully. They were still there when we arrived loading boxes into their vehicles. Andrea glared as I approached with the court documents in hand. This isn't over, she hissed. My parents won't let this property go without a fight. One of the officers stepped forward. Ma'am, we're here to ensure compliance with the court order. Please continue removing your personal belongings only. Jake emerged from the house carrying a box. He looked tired, the confident businessman facade cracked. For a moment I glimpsed the boy I had raised, uncertain and vulnerable. Mom, he began, but words seemed to fail him. I couldn't bring myself to respond. This hollow victory brought no joy, only the painful awareness that our relationship might never recover. The Parks left first, Mr. Park threatening legal counteraction as they departed. Jake lingered, setting down his box beside their car. I never meant for it to go this far, he said quietly. Andrea's parents made it sound simple. You'd get a percentage of the business profits enough to live comfortably somewhere smaller. It made financial sense. Financial sense, I echoed. This is my home, Jake, the home your father built. He looked away. Dad's been gone 10 years, Mom. Life moves on. Not by stealing from your mother, I replied, turning toward my front door. Please be gone when I come back out. They left within the hour, and for the first time in nearly a month, I stepped into my home as its rightful owner again. The destruction inside was heartbreaking. The living room had been stripped to studs on one wall, preparing for what would have been the storefront window. Kitchen cabinets lay in splintered pieces. Upstairs, only my bedroom remained relatively untouched, though many personal items were missing. Diana walked through with me, documenting everything for our ongoing case. We'll add property damage to our claims, she said, photographing the destruction. This strengthens our position for the criminal investigation. Standing in what remained of my kitchen, where Richard and I had shared thousands of meals, and where I had taught Jake to bake cookies, the magnitude of his betrayal finally hit me fully. I sank to the floor, tears flowing freely. Diana sat beside me, her legal pad set aside. It's okay to break down, Helen. What you've been through would destroy most people. He's still my son, I whispered. How do I reconcile that with what he did? She had no answer, and truthfully, neither did I. The next days passed in a blur of activity. Diana's case against Jake and the Parks gained momentum as Lincoln uncovered more evidence of their scheme. The altered power of attorney wasn't their only fraud. They had attempted to rezone the property for commercial use using falsified neighborhood approval signatures. The $75,000 payment to Jake turned out to be just the first installment of a planned 4-part payment totaling $375,000, far below market value for my property. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation into document fraud and elder financial abuse, interviewing Jake twice. According to Diana's sources, he was cooperating, likely hoping for leniency by implicating the Parks as the masterminds. Meanwhile, my home required extensive repairs. The construction company, learning they had been hired under fraudulent circumstances, offered to restore the damaged areas at cost. My community continued its support, organizing a weekend work party to help with cleanup. 20 neighbors showed up with tools, supplies, and food, working tirelessly to make my house livable again. Martha coordinated everything with military precision, assigning tasks based on skills and bringing order to chaos. Tom Peterson and his son repaired the electrical work that had been damaged during demolition. Alice and her garden club replanted my torn-up front yard. Carol from the library organized a furniture drive when we discovered my living room set had been sold. Sarah, my hospital nurse, stopped by with homemade soup and stayed to help organize the kitchen. "You're looking stronger," she observed. "How's the heart holding up with all this stress?" In truth, my cardiac recovery had taken a back seat to the legal battle, but my body was reminding me of its needs. I tired easily and experienced occasional chest pain. Dr. Levinson insisted on weekly checkups adjusting my medications to manage the added stress. "The best medicine for you right now is resolution," he advised during one visit. "Constant legal battles aren't good for cardiac recovery." Diana understood this concern. "We need to consider settlement options," she suggested during our strategy meeting 6 weeks after regaining my home. "Criminal charges are proceeding regardless, but resolving the civil matters quickly might be best for your health." I was torn. Part of me wanted Jake and the Parks to face maximum consequences for what they'd done. Another part just wanted peace and closure. "What would settlement look like?" I asked. "The Parks would compensate you for all damages to the house plus legal fees and emotional distress. Jake would formally relinquish any claim to the property and return any items removed from the house. And the criminal charges?" Diana was straightforward. "That's separate. The DA is focusing more on the Parks than Jake since evidence suggests they were the driving force. Jake is likely looking at probation if he continues cooperating. The Parks could face more serious consequences." I considered this. "Can I think about it overnight?" That evening, as I sat in my partially restored living room surrounded by a mixture of my original furniture and donated pieces, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Jake standing alone on the porch. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something made me open the door. He looked terrible. Unshaven eyes bloodshot, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. "Mom," he said simply. "Can we talk?" I let him in, but remained standing, maintaining distance. "Diana should be present for any discussion about the case." "I'm not here about the case," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm here to apologize. Not for legal reasons, because I need to." I gestured toward the kitchen, the only room with functional seating. We sat at my new table, donated by a church member I'd never even met. Jake struggled to meet my eyes. "I've been working with a therapist since everything fell apart, trying to understand how I could do what I did. And," I kept my voice neutral, protecting myself from hope or disappointment, "there's no excuse. None." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father it hurt. "Andrea and I have separated. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone obsessed with appearances and status. The Parks manipulated you," I offered, surprising myself with this small mercy. He shook his head firmly. "They presented opportunities, but I made my choices. I betrayed you for money and approval from people I didn't even respect." He paused, swallowing hard. "I keep thinking about Dad, what he would say if he could see what I did." The mention of Richard broke something in both of us. Tears filled Jake's eyes, and despite everything, my maternal instinct wanted to comfort him. I resisted. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued. "I just needed you to know I understand the magnitude of what I did. I'm cooperating fully with the authorities. The Parks are trying to blame everything on me, but there's enough evidence to show the truth." "What will you do now?" I asked. "I have resigned from my position. I'm selling the condo to pay back what I can. After that," he shrugged, "I'll figure something out." When he left, I didn't offer reconciliation or forgiveness. Some betrayals cut too deep for quick resolution, but something had shifted. The burning anger had subsided into a sadness that felt more manageable. 2 days later, Diana called with news. "The Parks want to settle the civil case. They're offering full restoration of your property compensation for all damages and additional punitive damages of $100,000. The amount stunned me. "Why so generous?" "Hardly generous considering what they tried to steal," Diana replied. "But their other business interests are suffering from the negative publicity. Several retail locations have canceled leases with them since the story broke. They're cutting their losses." After consultation with Dr. Levinson, who strongly recommended accepting for my health's sake, I agreed to the settlement. The criminal investigation would continue independently, but my personal legal battle was ending. The resolution came none too soon. The stress had taken a toll, and Dr. Levinson ordered 2 weeks of complete rest. Martha, ever vigilant, enforced this prescription, rigorously fielding calls and visitors to ensure my recovery. During this quiet period, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal had shattered my sense of security, but the community response had restored my faith in humanity. For every Jake and Andrea, there were a dozen Marthas, Dianas, and Sarahs, ready to stand against injustice. As my strength returned, I made a decision that would shape the next chapter of my life. 8 months after that terrible day, when I stood locked out of my own home, I sat in my restored living room hosting a gathering unlike any I'd held before. Around me sat a dozen seniors, all victims of financial exploitation by family members or caregivers. Diana had connected us as part of a new support network we were forming. "When my nephew stole my retirement savings, I was too ashamed to tell anyone," shared Gerald, a retired postal worker. "I thought I'd failed somehow by being taken advantage of." Heads nodded around the room. The shame of betrayal by family was something we all understood. "That's why this group is so important," I explained. "We need to remove the stigma and help others recognize the warning signs." My house, once nearly stolen from me, had become headquarters for the Boston Elderly Financial Protection Network. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all me. The settlement money from the parks had funded our startup costs, turning their greed into a force for good. The physical restoration of my home had been completed months earlier. The contractors had repaired all the damage, even improving some areas beyond their original condition. My kitchen now featured accessible cabinets and counters that accommodated the occasional mobility issues I experienced after my surgery. The garden had been replanted with perennials that required minimal maintenance. More important than the physical repairs was my emotional recovery. The trauma of Jake's betrayal had left deep scars, but I was healing. Our relationship remained complicated. He had pled guilty to reduced charges of document fraud and received 3 years probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. The Parks faced more serious consequences, with Mr. Park serving 8 months in a minimum security facility for fraud and conspiracy. Jake and I spoke occasionally, our conversations carefully navigating around painful topics. He was working at a warehouse, now living in a modest apartment and continuing therapy. Reconciliation seemed distant, but not impossible. Some days I missed the son I had raised. Other days the betrayal felt too raw to consider forgiveness. Diana had become more than my attorney. She was a close friend and partner in our advocacy work. Her expertise proved invaluable as we developed educational programs for senior centers and retirement communities across the state. "Helen, we've been invited to speak at the National Conference on Elder Law next month," she announced after our meeting concluded. "Your story has become something of a landmark case in financial exploitation prevention." I smiled, remembering how broken I had felt less than a year ago. From victim to advocate, not the retirement plan I expected. "The best advocates are those who've lived the experience," Diana replied. "You've helped dozens of seniors already. Imagine how many more you'll reach." Later that evening, as I sat alone in my living room, I looked at the photographs on my mantel. Richard's image smiled back at me alongside pictures of friends new and old. Jake's photo was there too, not a recent one, but from his college graduation when he was still the son I thought I knew. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Martha stood outside with a casserole dish. "Dinner patrol," she announced cheerfully. "Sarah's joining us." She brought wine. My neighbor and the nurse, who had supported me through my darkest days, had become regular visitors, our friendship strengthening with time. As we ate together, sharing stories and laughter, I realized how profoundly my definition of family had changed. The betrayal by my blood relative had been devastating, but it had opened my heart to a chosen family that proved more loyal than I could have imagined. My house was just a structure of wood and stone, but it had become something more, a symbol of resilience, a gathering place for warriors fighting elder abuse, and a home filled with more love and purpose than before the ordeal began. The path to healing wasn't complete, and perhaps never would be. Jake's actions had altered our relationship permanently. Yet something new and meaningful had emerged from that painful transformation, not just survival, but growth. The house my husband and I built had weathered a storm I never anticipated. Like me, it stood changed but stronger, its foundation more secure for having been tested. What my son and his in-laws intended for harm had ultimately created an unexpected legacy of advocacy and community. That night, as I prepared for bed in the room that had almost been taken from me, I thought about the countless seniors facing similar betrayals without the support I had been fortunate to receive. My work was just beginning, but for the first time since leaving the hospital to find myself homeless, I felt genuine peace about the future. The house was mine again, but more importantly, so was my life. Richer, more purposeful, and surrounded by a family I had found in the aftermath of betrayal. The lesson had been brutal, but clear true, family isn't always defined by blood, but by those who stand beside you when the world falls apart. What about you? Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you rebuild afterward? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story helped you recognize warning signs of elder financial abuse, please like and subscribe to spread awareness. Together, we can protect our most vulnerable community members from those who would exploit them. Thank you for listening to my journey from victim to advocate. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your power and help others do the same.